Madeline stood before the judge wearing grief like it was just another expensive accessory, explaining calmly why I couldn't be trusted with our father's money. She made me sound unstable, and looking at my shaking hands, I almost believed her. The gavel was seconds away from falling when the heavy oak doors groaned open. A stranger in a severe black suit stepped into the aisle, carrying a silence so loud it instantly drowned out my sister's lies. The rain in Briar Hollow did not wash things clean. It only made the town look older, sinking the colonial houses deeper into the mud and turning the iron gates of the cemetery into rusted rib cages. I drove my rental sedan through the main street, the windshield wipers slapping a frantic rhythm against the glass, trying to clear away the gray slush of a Massachusetts March. I was 33 years old, yet as I passed the familiar storefronts and the town square gazebo, I felt exactly like the 16-year-old girl who had left this place with a backpack and a desperate need to breathe oxygen that my sister had not already consumed. Madeline was waiting for me at the funeral home. Of course she was. She was standing under the portico, flanked by two men in dark suits who looked like they were guarding a diamond rather than mourning a man. My sister looked impeccable. Her black coat was tailored to a sharp, terrifying perfection, and her hair was pulled back in a knot so tight it pulled the skin of her face into a smooth, ageless mask. When I stepped out of the car, the air smelled of wet wool and decaying leaves. Madeline stepped forward, her heels clicking on the pavement with a precision that cut through the sound of the rain. "Alice," she said. Her voice was soft, warm, and entirely hollow. "You made it. We were worried the traffic from the city would delay you. I arrived exactly when I said I would," I replied, pulling my suitcase from the trunk. Madeline sighed, a delicate sound that suggested she was forgiving me for a sin I had not committed. "Well, you are here now. That is what matters. Come inside. People are already asking about you. They want to know why you have been so distant." I stiffened. I had not been distant. I had been working. I had been living a life that did not revolve around the gravitational pull of the Kelly family legacy. But arguing with Madeline was like trying to punch a cloud. You just swung through empty air and looked foolish while she remained untouched. Inside, the parlor was suffocating with the scent of lilies. There were too many flowers. It looked less like a wake and more like a state dinner. I stood by the open casket and looked down at my father. He looked smaller than I remembered. His face, waxy and still, held none of the nervous energy that had defined him in life. He had been a man who was always smoothing things over, always laughing a little too loudly to cover an awkward silence, always apologizing for things that were not his fault. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mrs. Gable, the town librarian. "Alice," she whispered, "it is so good to see you. We were not sure you would come back. Madeline said you were struggling with the pressure of it all." I looked across the room. Madeline was holding the hand of the mayor's wife, nodding sympathetically. She was rewriting the narrative in real time. She was painting a portrait of a grief-stricken, unstable younger sister who needed to be managed, while she, the stoic older sister, bore the weight of the family alone. "I am fine, Mrs. Gable," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am just sad. He was my father, too." The funeral passed in a blur of gray faces and damp handshakes. Madeline ran the logistics flawlessly. She directed the pallbearers with a nod, guided the guests to the reception with a subtle wave, and stood at the head of the receiving line like a queen granting audiences. I stood 3 feet behind her, a ghost in my own family. The next morning, the reality of what my father had left behind began to take shape. We were summoned to the offices of Wexler and Rudd, the law firm that had represented the Kelly family for 40 years. The office smelled of old leather and expensive cigars. Arthur Wexler sat behind a mahogany desk that was wide enough to land a plane on. He looked at Madeline with a familiarity that made me uncomfortable, then looked at me with a polite, weary patience. "Alice, Madeline," Arthur said, adjusting his glasses. "I am sorry we have to do this so soon, but the estate is complex. Your father had many irons in the fire. He opened a thick folder. The papers inside were cream-colored and heavy. The estate includes the primary residence on High Street, the lakeside property at Blackwood Point, several diversified investment accounts, and, of course, the controlling interest in the North Pine Community Foundation. I sat up straighter. North Pine. It was the family's crown jewel, a philanthropic organization that funded everything from the local library to the hospital wing. It was the reason the name Kelly meant something in this part of the state. Arthur cleared his throat. Your father left a will dated 6 months ago. In it, he expresses a desire for continuity. He felt that the foundation and the properties required a steady, local hand. He slid a document toward Madeline. Accordingly, the bulk of the estate, including the real estate and the board seat at North Pine, is bequeathed to Madeline. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Arthur, then at Madeline. She was studying her fingernails, her expression unreadable. And Alice? I asked. My voice sounded small in the large room. Arthur turned a page. Alice is to receive a cash settlement of $50,000. The language here is slightly unusual. It says this amount is for her to start fresh, unburdened by the complexities of the past. $50,000. It was a lot of money to some, but compared to the millions locked up in the real estate and the foundation, it was an insult. It was a tip left on a table. Unburdened? I asked. What does that mean? Madeline looked up then. Her eyes were cool, blue glass. He knew you. Alice, he knew you did not want the responsibility. You hated this town. You hated the expectations. He was trying to set you free. I stood up. I did not want to be set free. I wanted my fair share. I wanted to know why my father, who had called me every Sunday just to hear my voice, would cut me out like this. Can I see the will? I asked. Arthur hesitated, then pushed the document toward me. I scanned the text. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was clear. Madeline got the power, I got the door, but there was something else. The clauses regarding the North Pine Foundation were vague. They referred to an attached schedule of assets and obligations, but when I flipped to the back, the schedule was missing. Where's the rest of it? I asked. The schedule. Arthur frowned. It must have been misfiled. It is a minor administrative error. The intent is clear regardless. I looked at my sister. She was watching me with a look of predatory patience. I am not signing anything today, I said. Madeline's smile tightened at the corners. Take your time. Alice, grief makes us irrational. We can discuss this at home. I walked out of the office into the cold afternoon air, my heart hammering against my ribs. I did not go back to the family house immediately. Instead, I drove to the lakeside property at Blackwood Point. It was a sprawling Victorian house that sat on a cliff overlooking the dark water. The windows were boarded up for the winter, but as I walked around the perimeter, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel driveway. The grass near the back entrance was trampled, as if people had been coming and going regularly. My father had told me the lake house was closed for the season. He had told me he was too tired to go out there anymore. I drove back to town, my mind racing. When I got to the main house, Madeline was out. The silence in the house was heavy. I went into my father's study. It smelled of pipe tobacco and dust. I sat in his leather chair, running my hands over the worn armrests. I opened the top drawer. It was empty, save for a few paper clips. Madeline had already been here. She had sanitized the room, but my father had a habit. He never trusted drawers. He trusted books. I stood up and went to the bookshelf. There, wedged between a copy of Moby Dick and a history of the Civil War, was a thick envelope. It was not marked with a name, but I knew it was for me. I pulled it out. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal paper, covered in my father's looping, frantic handwriting. Alice, I am sorry. I am so sorry for what I let happen. I thought I could fix it, but the water is rising faster than I can bail. If you are reading this, I am gone, and they will try to push you out. They will say it is for your own good. Do not believe them. Hold steady when they pressure you. The house on the lake is not just a house. North Pine is not just a charity. I wanted to tell you, but I was a coward. Forgive me. Dad. I read the note 3 times. What I let happen, the phrase hung in the air like smoke. My father was a man who avoided conflict at all costs. He would agree to anything to keep the peace. What had he agreed to? I folded the letter and shoved it deep into my pocket. Just as I heard the front door open, Madeline was home. I found her in the kitchen, making tea. She looked up as I entered, her face composing itself into a mask of concern. "Alice," she said, "I was worried. You ran out of the office so abruptly." I sat down at the table. She placed a cup of tea in front of me. Earl Grey, my favorite. It was a calculated kindness. "I have been thinking," Madeline said, sitting opposite me. "I know the will was a shock. Dad was eccentric in his final months. I do not want you to feel slighted." She took a sip of her tea. "I am willing to offer you a private settlement," she said, "aside from the $50,000 in the will. I will give you another $200,000 for my own share. Cash. You can take it and go back to the city. You can buy that apartment you always wanted. You can start your own business." It was a lot of money. $250,000. It was life-changing money, and all I had to do was leave. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do that?" "Because we are sisters," she said smoothly, "and because I know you do not belong here. You would be miserable managing the foundation. It is boring work. Dinners, board meetings, tax filings. You are too creative for that." I touched the pocket where the letter was burning against my hip. Dad left me a note. I said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Madeline did not blink, but I saw her hand tighten around her teacup until her knuckles turned white. "A note?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but the warmth was gone. "He told me not to let you push me out." I said, "He said North Pine is not just a charity." Madeline set her cup down. It made a sharp clatter against the saucer. Dad was on heavy medication at the end. "Alice?" He was confused. He was paranoid. He wrote notes to the mailman claiming the government was spying on him. You cannot take the ramblings of a dying man as truth. He sounded lucid to me. I lied. Madeline stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the rain. "I am offering you a lifeline. Alice, if you stay, if you try to fight this, it will get ugly. The legal fees alone will bankrupt you. And for what? To live in a town you hate? To manage a foundation you know nothing about? I am not signing." I said. Madeline turned around. Her face was shadowed. "That is a mistake." The next day, I went to the North Pine Foundation headquarters. It was a brick building on the edge of the town square, modest but dignified. I told the receptionist I was there to collect some of my father's personal effects from his office. She looked nervous but buzzed me through. I was walking down the hallway when a woman stepped out of a side office. She was young, maybe 25, with glasses and a cardigan that looked too big for her. She held a stack of files against her chest like a shield. "You are Alice Kelly," she said. It was not a question. I said. She looked left, then right, checking the hallway. "I am Renee Holloway. I was your father's assistant for the last 2 years." "Hi, Renee." I said, "I am here to—" "I know," she interrupted. "Listen, I cannot talk long. Madeline's lawyers were here this morning. They took his computer. They took the physical files from the red cabinet." "Why?" I asked. Renee lowered her voice to a whisper. "They said it was standard procedure for the estate, but they were looking for specific dates. Years ago. There are files here that do not match the public story. Alice. Grants that went to people who do not exist. Projects that were marked as completed but never broke ground." She stopped, her eyes widening as she looked over my shoulder. I turned to see a security guard walking toward us. "I have to go," Renee said. She hurried away, her head down. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding. Grants to people who do not exist. My father, the conflict-avoidant man who just wanted everyone to be happy, had been sitting on top of a fraud. Or maybe he had been forced into it. What I let happen, I left the building with a box of paperweights and framed photos. but my mind was elsewhere. I needed legal advice, not from Arthur Wexler. I needed someone who did not owe the Kelly family a favor. 2 days later, the summons arrived. I was staying at a small motel on the highway, having refused to spend another night under Madeline's roof. A process server knocked on my door at 7 in the morning. He handed me a thick packet of documents. I sat on the edge of the cheap mattress and read them. Madeline had filed a formal challenge in probate court. She was petitioning to invalidate any claim I might have to the estate beyond the $50,000. The grounds for the petition made the breath catch in my throat. Undue influence. The document claimed that I, Alice Kelly, had manipulated our father during his final months, taking advantage of his diminished mental state to extract promises and alter his estate planning. It claimed I had harassed him with phone calls demanding money. It claimed I had threatened to cut off contact if he did not include me in the will. It was a lie so total, so audacious, that I almost laughed. I had not been in Briar Hollow for 6 months before he died. My phone calls had been about the weather, about books, about his garden. I had never asked for a dime. Madeline was not just trying to cut me out. She was trying to destroy my character. She was putting it on public record that I was a predator. I threw the papers onto the floor. I paced the small room. This was her strategy. She knew I had no money for a long fight. She knew I valued my privacy. She expected me to read this, panic, and accept the settlement just to make the accusations go away. She was right about one thing. I was afraid. But she was wrong about the other. I was not the 16-year-old girl who ran away anymore. I picked up the phone book, an actual physical phone book that sat on the nightstand, and flipped to the yellow pages. I looked for attorneys. I skipped the big ads with the smiling faces. I looked for the small, serious listings. I found a name, Dara Linwood. The office address was in the next town over, in a strip mall. Not a historic building. I drove there immediately. The office was small, cluttered with boxes, and smelled of stale coffee. Dara Linwood was a woman in her 50s with graying hair cut short and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. She read the will. She read the letter from my father. She read Madeline's petition. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Your sister is playing hardball," Dara said. Her voice was gravelly. Accusing a sibling of undue influence when they were not even in the state is bold. It means she thinks you are weak. She thinks you will fold before discovery begins. She will destroy me in town. I said, "Everyone believes her. She is the perfect daughter." Dara looked at me. "In probate court, character is a story we tell, but facts are the bricks we build with. If she is lying about the undue influence, we can prove it. Phone records, travel logs. We can show the judge that you were 300 miles away when you were supposedly twisting your father's arm." She tapped the letter from my father. "But this," she said, "this is the dangerous part. What I let happen. If we use this, we are not just fighting for money. We are opening a door that your father locked from the inside. If there is fraud at that foundation, and you expose it, you might destroy your father's reputation along with your sister's." I thought about my father's face in the casket. I thought about the fear in his handwriting. I thought of Renee Holloway looking over her shoulder. He asked me to hold steady. I said. Dara nodded. She pulled a retainer agreement from her drawer. "I am not cheap," she said, "but I am thorough, and I hate bullies." I signed the paper. I drove back to Briar Hollow as the sun was setting. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the sky a bruised purple. I passed the North Pine Foundation building. The lights were on in the executive suite. Madeline was probably in there, shredding documents, rewriting history, ensuring the legacy remained pristine. She thought she had buried me. She thought she was the only one who knew how to play the game. I gripped the steering wheel. I was Alice Kelly. I was the one who left. I was the one who didn't fit. But now, I was the one who was staying. I pulled into the motel parking lot and turned off the engine. I was ready to burn the piece to the ground if that was what it took to find the truth. The fight had begun. The morning of the first hearing was cold. The courthouse in Briar Hollow was a granite fortress that loomed over the town square, a relic from a time when justice was synonymous with intimidation. I met Dara on the steps. She was wearing a gray suit that looked like armor. She carried a briefcase that seemed to weigh more than she did. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, though my stomach was twisting in knots. Inside, the hallway was crowded. Madeline was already there, standing with Caleb Norick, a high-profile probate litigator from Boston. I had read about him. He was known as the Thresher. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Madeline did not look at me at all. She was staring at the courtroom doors, her profile sharp and icy. We entered the courtroom. The judge, an elderly man named Honorable Thomas Halloway, looked bored before we even began. "Matter of the estate of Richard Kelly." The clerk announced. Caleb Norick stood up. "Your Honor, we are here to motion for a summary judgment regarding the validity of the will and to address the matter of the petitioner's undue influence on the decedent." Dara stood up slowly. "Your Honor, we object to the motion. We have evidence that contradicts the claims of undue influence, and we have reason to believe the submitted will is incomplete. There is a missing schedule of assets that is referenced in the document but was not provided." Judge Halloway looked over his spectacles. "A missing schedule?" "Yes, Your Honor," Dara said. "And given the complexity of the estate, specifically the assets tied to the North Pine Community Foundation, we believe full discovery is necessary." Norwick chuckled. "Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. Ms. Kelly is upset about her share and is trying to drag a charitable organization into a family dispute to create leverage." The judge sighed. He looked at me, then at Madeline. "I will allow limited discovery," he said. "But let us keep this focused. I do not want this turning into a circus." Madeline turned to look at me then. For the first time, our eyes locked. There was no sisterly warmth left. There was only a cold, hard warning. She mouthed a single word to me. "Stop." I looked away. I focused on the judge. I focused on the letter in my pocket. I focused on the feeling of being the outsider, the one who didn't matter. I would not stop. I was just getting started. As we walked out of the courtroom, Renee Holloway was standing near the exit. She looked terrified. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, then looked down at her shoes. She was holding a file folder tight against her chest. Dara noticed. "Who is that?" "Someone who knows something," I said. Dara watched her go. "Then we need to talk to her, before your sister does." I watched Madeline walk down the marble stairs, surrounded by her legal team. She looked invincible, but I remembered the tremor in her hand when I mentioned the letter. She was afraid, and fear makes people make mistakes. I took a deep breath of the cold air. "Let's go to work." I said to Dara, "Part 1 was over. The prelude was done. Now, we were in the thick of it. And I had a feeling that the missing schedule and the files at North Pine were just the tip of the iceberg. My father had apologized for what he let happen. I was going to find out exactly what that was, even if it meant tearing down the house he built. I got into my car and turned the key. The engine roared to life. I wasn't running away this time. I was driving straight into the storm. The conference room in Dara Linwood's office had become a war room. The walls were covered in butcher paper, taped up with blue painter's tape, creating a timeline that stretched across 3 walls. It was a map of the last 12 months of my father's life. I stood in front of the month of November, a marker in my hand. He canceled on Thanksgiving. I said, I remembered the phone call. His voice had sounded thin, strained. He said there was a crisis at the foundation, a plumbing issue at the youth center. He said, Dara was sitting at the table, surrounded by boxes of bank records we had subpoenaed from his personal accounts. Check the date, Dara said. November 24th. I wrote it down. November 24th. Canceled visit. Reason. Plumbing issue. Dara flipped a page in her file. There was no plumbing issue, she said. I checked the maintenance logs for the youth center. No work orders were filed in November, but on November 24th, there was a wire transfer from your father's personal account to an account simply labeled Consulting. $5,000. I capped the marker. He lied to me. He lied to everyone. Alice, Dara said gently, but look at the pattern. I stepped back and looked at the wall. It was a constellation of disappointments. July 4th, cancelled, reason, donor emergency. August 15th, my birthday, cancelled, reason, board retreat. October 10th, cancelled, reason, audit prep. Every time he was supposed to come to the city, every time he was supposed to leave Briar Hollow and be just my dad. Something pulled him back. It wasn't work, I said, tracing the line of ink with my finger. It was a leash. Every time he tried to leave, they yanked him back. Dara nodded, and every time he was yanked back, money moved. Sometimes from him, sometimes from the foundation accounts we can see. It wasn't emergencies. Alice, it was maintenance. He was paying to keep something contained. The door opened, and Dara's paralegal, a young man named Kevin, walked in carrying a heavy banker's box. He looked exhausted. The production from North Pine arrived, Kevin said, dropping the box on the table with a heavy thud, or at least, what they decided to give us. I tore into the box. I expected neat files, clear answers. What I found was a sea of black ink. They had redacted almost everything. Names were blacked out. Dollar amounts were blacked out. Entire paragraphs of meeting minutes were reduced to thick, heavy bars of censorship. They can't do this, I said, holding up a page that was 90% black ink. They can if they claim privilege or privacy, Dara said, picking up a document. But they made a mistake. They always make a mistake. Look at the headers. I looked. The text of the minutes was gone, but the subject lines remained. Grant allocation, third quarter, community outreach, scholarship review, and then, repeated 4 times in 6 months, a phrase I had never heard before. Project Harbor Shield, protective relocation support. Harbor Shield? I asked. What is that? A shelter? Dara went to her computer. She typed furiously for a minute. There is no public record of a program called Harbor Shield, she said. North Pine's website lists arts grants, educational scholarships, and medical funding. No housing support, no relocation services, protective relocation. I repeated. That sounds like witness protection. Dara finished, or running away. I looked at the redacted pages. My father had been funneling money into something called Harbor Shield. He had been canceling visits to deal with it, and Madeline was fighting tooth and nail to keep me from seeing it. I need to go back to the office. I said, I need to ask Renee. Dara shook her head. Madeline will have security there. If they catch you, they will file a restraining order. It will look bad to the judge. I won't get caught. I said, I just need 5 minutes. The North Pine Foundation office was quiet. It was lunch hour, and the reception desk was empty. I knew the layout from when I was a child, running through these halls while my father signed checks. I slipped past the front desk and down the corridor toward the break room. I found Renee Holloway by the vending machine. She was staring at a bag of chips caught in the coil, her reflection in the glass looking tired and pale. When she saw me, she flinched so hard she dropped her water bottle. Alice, she hissed, you cannot be here. If Mrs. Kelly sees you, I am not here to fight. Renee, I said, keeping my voice low. I saw the files, the ones they sent over. Renee looked around nervously. She pressed the button for the chips again, just to have something to do with her hands. They redacted everything. Didn't they? She whispered. They missed a name. I said, Harbor Shield. Renee went still. The color drained from her face completely. She didn't look at me. She stared at the stuck bag of chips as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. I don't know what that is, she said. Her voice was trembling. You do. I said, you told me there were files that didn't match the story. Renee, my father is dead. Madeline is trying to destroy me in court. I need to know what Harbor Shield is. Renee turned to me. Her eyes were wet. It is not a program. Alice, it is a list. A list of what? She reached into her oversized cardigan. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, flattened it against her chest, and glanced down the hallway. They are shredding things, she whispered. Every day. The shredder runs for hours. I took this out of the bin before they emptied it. It is just an agenda. From 5 years ago. She shoved the paper into my hand. Go, she said. Please, before they see us. I didn't argue. I shoved the paper into my pocket and walked out the back exit. My heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't look at the paper until I was safe in my car. 3 blocks away, I unfolded it. It was a wrinkled agenda for a special board meeting. Dated 5 years prior. Item 4 was circled in red pen. Risk containment. Briar Vale Credit Union. Insolvency. Testimony exposure. I stared at the words. Briar Vale Credit Union. I remembered the name. It was a local bank. A small institution that had collapsed when I was in my late 20s. It had been a scandal. A messy community thing, as my mother had called it. People lost savings. There were rumors of embezzlement. But the investigation had fizzled out. No one went to jail. The manager had committed suicide. The story had died. What did my father have to do with a failed credit union? I drove straight to Dara's office. I put the wrinkled paper on her desk. Briar Vale, Dara said, reading the line. That was ugly. A lot of working-class families in this town got wiped out. Why is North Pine involved? I asked. Why is there a risk containment item about testimony exposure? Dara leaned back in her chair. Her eyes sharp. Because, Alice, if a charity foundation is worried about testimony exposure regarding a bank failure, it means someone at the foundation knew something they weren't supposed to. Or worse, they were involved. She started typing again. I am pulling the old board lists for Briar Vale, she said. I waited. The silence in the office was thick. Here, Dara said softly. She turned the screen toward me. The advisory committee for the Briar Vale Credit Union, the year it collapsed. There were 5 names. 3 were local business owners. 1 was the manager who died, and the 5th name was Richard Kelly, my father. He wasn't on the board of directors. Dara said, he was on the advisory committee. It is usually a ceremonial role. You show up to ribbon cuttings. You lend your name to build trust. Trust, I said bitterly. People trusted that bank because his name was on it, and when it collapsed, Dara said, the investigation stopped. Why did it stop? Testimony exposure. I quoted from the agenda. They bought silence. Dara said. Her voice was cold. Harbor Shield isn't a shelter. It is a payroll. They were paying people to not testify, to disappear. And your father. My father was the face of it. I said, what I let happen. He didn't steal the money. I said, trying to convince myself, he wouldn't. Maybe not. Dara said, but he helped cover up for whoever did, and he used the foundation to do it. The weight of it settled on me. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was a crime, a 5-year-old crime that my sister was still paying to keep buried. The day of the deposition. The sky was a flat, relentless gray. We met in the conference room of Wexler and Rudd. It was designed to intimidate. The table was polished mahogany. The chairs were leather, and the view out the window was of the town square my family practically owned. Madeline was there, of course. She sat at the far end of the table, looking at her phone. She didn't greet me. Caleb Norick sat opposite me. He didn't have a notepad. He had a thick file with my name on it. He turned on the recorder. This is the deposition of Alice Kelly, he said. The date is March 15th. He started with the basics. My name, my address, my employment history. You are a freelance graphic designer. Is that correct? He asked. Yes, I said. And your income fluctuates? It varies. Yes, in the last 2 years. Have you had months where you could not make rent? I looked at Dara. She gave a microscopic nod. Precision. I have had lean months. I said, but I have never missed a rent payment. Norwick smiled. A shark sensing blood. You have credit card debt. Ms. Kelly, $15,000. Roughly? I felt my face heat up. It was from a medical bill 2 years ago. I was paying it off. Yes, I said. So, Norwick leaned forward. You have debt, you have unstable income, you live in a rented apartment, and suddenly, your wealthy father dies, and you find yourself returning to a town you claim to hate, demanding access to foundation accounts you have no experience with. He let the silence hang. Is it not true, Ms. Kelly, that this entire proceeding, the allegations of a missing schedule, the harassment of the foundation, is simply a strategy to force a settlement because you are broke? I looked at Madeline. She was watching me, her face impassive. She wanted me to break. She wanted me to scream that it wasn't about the money. She wanted me to look desperate. I took a sip of water. I set the glass down. No, Mr. Norick, I said. My voice was calm. It is not true. You are not chasing a payday? I am chasing clarity. I said, I am chasing the reason why my father, a man with millions in assets, felt the need to apologize in a letter for what he let happen. I am chasing the reason why my sister is paying for estate property through a shell company called Grapevine. I am chasing the reason why the foundation has a line item for witness relocation tied to a failed credit union. Norwick's smile faltered. Just for a second. We will strike that from the record as non-responsive, he snapped. You asked me what I was chasing. I said, I answered. Norwick spent the next 3 hours trying to tear me apart. He asked about my dating life. He asked about why I didn't come home for Christmas 3 years ago. He asked if I had ever been in therapy. He tried to paint me as emotionally fragile, bitter, and estranged, but I had the map in my head. I had the dates. Why did you not visit your father in November? Norwick asked. Because he told me there was a plumbing emergency at the youth center. I said, but there was no plumbing emergency. There was a wire transfer. Norwick closed his file. We are done for today, he said abruptly. As we packed up, Dara leaned over to me. You did perfectly, she whispered. He is rattled. He expected you to cry. You gave him data. Back at Dara's office. The adrenaline crashed. I slumped into the chair, exhausted. They are going to drag everything out. I said, my debts, my mistakes, let them. Dara said. She was looking at a document on her desk with a magnifying glass. What is that? I asked. It is the notarized affidavit Madeline submitted with the initial probate filing. Dara said, the one where she claims your father was of sound mind and that she witnessed him signing the will with no duress. And, look at the stamp. Dara said. She handed me the magnifying glass. I looked. It was a standard notary stamp. Commission expires June 12th, 2026. Now look at the date of the signature. Dara said, September 10th, 2 years ago. I looked. I ran the notary's commission number. Dara said, this notary, a Ms. Sarah Jenkins, renewed her commission in January of this year. Her previous stamp, the one she would have used 2 years ago, would have had a different expiration date and a different commission number. I lowered the glass. This document was stamped with a seal that didn't exist when it was supposedly signed. Exactly, Dara said. It was backdated. Someone stamped it recently and wrote an old date on it. Is that fraud? I asked. It is procedural sloppiness at best, Dara said. But at worst, it means the document wasn't signed when they said it was, or it wasn't witnessed by the notary at all. It is a thread, Alice, and we are going to pull it. I drove back to the motel feeling a strange shift inside me. For weeks, I had been operating on hurt that my father lied, hurt that my sister rejected me, but the hurt was calcifying into something harder. Madeline didn't just want the money. She wanted to be the queen. She used her social standing, her poise, her expensive lawyers as weapons. She didn't scream because she didn't have to. She let the system scream for her, but the system was made of paper, and paper had flaws. The court order for the North Pine records came through 2 days later. It was a partial victory. The judge ordered them to produce the unredacted minutes for the specific dates I had identified on the timeline, but North Pine didn't send them. Instead, they sent a letter stating that the files were in deep storage and would require significant time to retrieve and digitize. They asked for a 30-day extension. 30 days, I said, pacing in Dara's office. They are buying time. They are shredding, Dara corrected, or they are manufacturing new minutes to replace the old ones. Can we stop them? We can file a motion to compel, Dara said, but that takes time too. Madeline knows how to play the clock. She has the resources to wait you out. She knows you are paying for this motel, paying for my hours. She is bleeding you. I am not leaving. I said, I will sleep in my car if I have to. I returned to the motel that evening, my head throbbing. The neon sign of the Briar Hollow Inn flickered with a buzzing sound that set my teeth on edge. I walked down the external corridor to room 104. I stopped. There was a white envelope sitting on the doormat. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a flyer for pizza. It was a thick, heavy envelope with no return address. I looked around the parking lot. It was empty, except for a few pickup trucks and my rental. The wind blew a fast food wrapper across the asphalt. I picked up the envelope. It felt dense. I went inside, locked the door, and engaged the deadbolt. I wedged the chair under the handle again. I sat on the bed and opened it. Inside was a photocopy. It looked like it had been made on an old machine. The contrast was too high. The paper speckled with toner dots. It was a header page for a legal agreement. Confidential Cooperation and Settlement Agreement. The names of the parties were blacked out with thick marker, but the text below was visible. Whereas, the party of the second part agrees to provide no testimony, deposition, or voluntary statement regarding the operations, solvency, or management of Briar Vale Credit Union. And whereas, the party of the first part agrees to provide guaranteed financial support, including relocation costs and a monthly stipend of $4,000 for a period of 10 years. In exchange for complete silence, I read the words again. Financial solvency guaranteed in exchange for complete silence. It was a contract to buy a witness. My father's foundation wasn't just fixing a plumbing issue. They were running a payroll for people who knew the truth about the bank failure. They were paying hush money. And if this document existed, it meant there were people out there, real people, who were on this payroll, people who had been moved, people who were hiding. I turned the page over. On the back, handwritten in scrawled blue ink, was a message. They are not just protecting the money, they are protecting the names. Watch the doors at the next hearing. I dropped the paper on the bed as if it were burning. My father hadn't just been weak. He had been the banker for a conspiracy. And Madeline? Madeline was the one making sure the check still cleared. I walked to the window and looked out through the crack in the curtains. The parking lot was dark, but for the first time, I felt certain that I wasn't just fighting my sister. I was fighting a machine that had been running in the dark for 5 years, and I had just turned on the light. I took a picture of the document and texted it to Dara. I got something. I typed, "We are not waiting for the 30 days. I sat in the dark, watching the door. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but the resolve was stronger. I wasn't just Alice Kelly, the disappointment. I was the one holding the match, and I was ready to drop it. The motion to compel was not just a legal document, it was a declaration of war. Dara Linwood stood in the center of her office, the fluorescent lights humming above her, holding the freshly printed brief like a weapon. She had spent the last 48 hours connecting the dots I had brought her, the missing schedule, the redacted minutes, the anonymous contract header, and the bank transfers. We are arguing that the estate dispute is inseparable from the Foundation's hidden agreements, Dara explained, pacing the worn carpet. If your father's personal assets were used to fund these agreements, these hush money payments, then the Foundation's records are estate records. They cannot claim privacy if they were spending your inheritance to buy silence. She slapped the folder down on the desk. Madeline's team calls it a conspiracy theory. She said, "They filed a response this morning calling our claims fanciful and defamatory. They are saying I am leading you down a rabbit hole of paranoia." I looked at the photocopy of the confidential agreement lying on the desk. The blacked-out names. The promise of financial solvency for silence. It is not paranoia if they are actually out to get you. I said. Dara nodded. Exactly. We file this at noon. The filing hit the courthouse like a bomb. By 2 o'clock, my phone was buzzing with notifications from the local paper's online portal. Inheritance dispute expands to North Pine Foundation. Daughter alleges secret payoffs. The headlines were sensational. Exactly what Madeline hated most. She wanted a quiet coronation. I was giving her a public autopsy. I left the motel to get coffee, needing to escape the suffocating smell of industrial cleaner in my room. As I walked back to my car, a black SUV pulled up alongside me. The window rolled down. It was Madeline. "Get in," she said. I kept walking. "I have nothing to say to you without a lawyer present." "Alice, get in the car," she snapped. Her voice wasn't the polished, public voice she used in court. It was the voice of the older sister who used to pinch me until I bruised. "Then tell me to stop crying." I stopped. I walked over to the window but didn't open the door. "What do you want? Madeline?" She looked at me, and for the first time since I had returned to Briar Hollow, I saw the cracks in the porcelain. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked tired, not just sleepy, bone-deep exhausted. "You have to withdraw the motion," she said. Her voice was low, urgent. "You do not understand what you are doing." "I am finding the truth," I said. "I am finding out why Dad was afraid." "You are finding out things that were buried for a reason," she hissed. "You think this is just about money? You think I am trying to keep the lake house because I am greedy? Alice, grow up. You are pulling at a thread that is attached to a guillotine." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is a warning," she said. "You do not understand who you are pulling into this. It is not just family. It is bigger." "Who?" I asked. "Who are you protecting?" "Madeline." She gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "I am protecting you, you idiot. If those agreements come to light, if the names come out, everything Dad built, everything he tried to fix, it all collapses. And the people he made promises to, they will not be happy." She looked at me, and I saw genuine fear. It wasn't a performance. She was terrified. "Drop the motion. Alice, take the settlement. Leave town. Please." I stepped back from the car. "Tell me where Schedule B is," I said. "Tell me what Harbor Shield is." Madeline stared at me for a long moment. Then she shook her head, a slow, mournful movement. "God help you, Alice." She rolled up the window and the SUV sped away, leaving me standing in the cold wind of the parking lot. "You don't understand who you're pulling into this." The words echoed in my head. She hadn't said what I was pulling in. She said who. I needed to understand the man who had built this trap. I needed to talk to Elliot Brann again. I found Elliot at his small insurance office on Main Street. He was packing a box of files, looking like a man preparing for a long journey. When he saw me, he sighed. Taking off his glasses, "I heard about the motion," he said. "You are kicking the hornet's nest. Alice, I need to know what he did." "Elliot," I said, sitting in the chair opposite him. "Madeline is terrified. She says I'm pulling people into this." "Who?" Elliot sat down heavily. He rubbed his face with his hands. "Your father. He wanted to be the hero. You know that. He always wanted to be the one who fixed things." "Fix what? The credit union?" Elliot looked at the door, ensuring it was closed. When Briar Vale collapsed, it was a mess. People lost savings. Families were ruined. The regulators were circling. "Your father was on the advisory committee. He wasn't responsible for the bad loans, but he felt responsible for the community. He thought he could help negotiate a soft landing. And he got in a room with men who didn't want a soft landing. They wanted a cover-up. They needed the witnesses, the tellers, the loan officers who knew about the fraud, to go away, to stay quiet until the statute of limitations ran out. And my father paid them?" Elliot nodded slowly. "He didn't use his own money at first. He used the foundation. He set up the structure. He convinced himself it was charity. Relocation support, he called it, helping people start over. But it wasn't charity. Alice, it was bribery. I felt sick. My father, the moral compass of the town, was the bagman for a financial crime. I saw him once, Elliot said softly, staring at the wall. About 3 years ago. He was leaving a closed-door meeting at the North Pine office. He looked like he had aged 10 years in an hour. I asked him if he was okay. He looked at me, right in the eyes, and he muttered, "I thought I was helping, but I became the lock." "The lock," I repeated. "He was the one keeping the secrets." Elliot said, "And the thing about being a lock, Alice, is that you can't ever open, or everything falls out. Madeline, she inherited the key, and she is just trying to keep the door shut." I left Elliot's office with a heavy heart. My father hadn't been a villain, not exactly. He had been a man who made one compromise, then another, until he was trapped. And now, Madeline was trapped with him, but understanding didn't mean stopping. I went back to Dara's office. She was waiting for me with a look of grim triumph. "I found something," she said. She turned her computer monitor toward me. It showed a split screen. On one side was the corporate filing for Grey Pine Asset Services, Madeline's shell company. On the other side was a leasing agreement for an office suite in a business park 3 towns over. "Look at the address for Grey Pine," Dara said. "Suite 404-1200, Commerce Drive." "Okay," I said. "Now look at the tenant list for 1200 Commerce Drive," she said. "Suite 404 is leased to Grey Pine, but Suite 402 and 403, they are leased to Legal Services Division, NCF, I whispered. "North Pine Community Foundation. They are neighbors." Dara said, "They share a wall. And more importantly, I pulled the building schematics. Suite 404 and Suite 403 have an internal connecting door." I stared at the screen. Madeline's private company and the foundation's legal team weren't just connected financially, they were physically in the same room. "This proves commingling," Dara said. "It proves that Grey Pine is just an arm of the foundation, operating off the books. Madeline isn't just managing the property. She is running the cleanup operation from the same office. We have them." I said. Dara's face didn't relax. "We have a link," she said, "but they are fighting back. Dirty." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a witness list. Madeline's counsel had filed it an hour ago. I picked it up. My eyes scanned the names. I didn't recognize most of them, but 2 stood out. Mary Higgins, hospice nurse, Mrs. Gable, neighbor. "Why are they calling the librarian?" I asked. "And the nurse?" "Read the summary of expected testimony." Dara said quietly. I read it. "Witness will testify to the strained relationship between the decedent and the petitioner. Witness will testify that the petitioner, Alice Kelly, made repeated harassing phone calls to the decedent in his final days, causing him distress and exacerbating his condition." I dropped the paper. "They are going to say I killed him," I said, my voice shaking. "They are going to say I stressed him to death. They are going to say you were emotionally abusive." Dara said, "They are trying to invalidate your character. If the judge thinks you are a horrible daughter who harassed a dying man, he won't care about the shell companies. He will think you are just lashing out." I felt a wave of nausea. Mrs. Gable had hugged me at the funeral. She had told me how good it was to see me, and now she was going to testify that I was a monster? Madeline got to her. I said, "Madeline owns this town." "Alice," Dara said, "she funds the library. She funds the hospice center. These people, they have to live here. You don't." I put my head in my hands. It was cruel. It was so incredibly cruel. My grief, my guilt over not being there enough. Madeline was taking it, sharpening it, and stabbing me in the chest with it. "I want to fight," I said into my hands. "Then we need to break their narrative." Dara said, "We need to prove that the documents they are standing on are lies." She pulled out the affidavit with the suspicious notary stamp. "You need to find Sarah Jenkins." Dara said, "The notary. If she testifies that she didn't sign this, their credibility crumbles. If they forged a signature, nothing else matters." I spent the next morning tracking down Sarah Jenkins. She didn't work at the bank anymore. According to an old directory, She lived in a small ranch house on the outskirts of town, near the old textile mill. I drove out there. The house was modest, the siding peeling slightly. A tricycle sat in the driveway. I knocked on the door. A woman in her 30s answered. She looked tired, wearing a nursing scrub top. "Sarah Jenkins?" I asked. "Yes." "My name is Alice Kelly. I need to ask you about a document you notarized 2 years ago. For Richard Kelly." Her face closed instantly. "I don't know anything about that," she said, starting to close the door. "Please," I said, putting my hand on the frame. "It is about a will. My sister claims you witnessed my father signing it." She stopped. She looked at me. Really looked at me. "I haven't notarized anything in 4 years," she said. "Not since I left the bank." I pulled the photocopy of the affidavit from my bag. I held it up. "This has your stamp on it. Dated September 10th. 2 years ago." She looked at the document. Then she laughed. A bitter, short sound. That stamp was stolen. She said, "Stolen?" "From my car. 3 years ago. My purse was taken. I reported it to the police. I reported it to the state commission. I had to get a new commission number." She pointed to the stamp on the paper. "That is my old number. But the expiration date? That is from my new commission. Someone mashed them together. They used my old stamp, but tried to update the date with a pen or a different stamp. It's a mess. Did you sign this?" I asked. She shook her head vigorously. "No, that is not my signature. That is a forgery. Will you testify to that?" I asked. She hesitated. She looked at the tricycle in the driveway. "I don't want trouble," she said. "The Kellys? They are powerful. They are trying to frame me." "Sarah," I said, "they are trying to say I harassed my father to death. Please, just tell the truth." She looked at me for a long time. Then she sighed. "I reported the theft." She said, "I have the police report. I won't lie for them. If you subpoena me, I will tell the judge it wasn't me." "Thank you," I breathed. I drove back to Dara's office feeling a surge of hope. We had them. Forgery. It was a felony. Dara didn't share my elation. She looked grim. "We have the evidence," she said, "but they know we have it." "How?" "Because Caleb Norick just filed a motion to seal the case record." "To seal it?" "He is arguing that the discovery materials contain sensitive proprietary information regarding the Foundation's donors and that public disclosure would cause irreparable harm to the community. He wants the courtroom closed. He wants the transcripts redacted. He wants to hide the forgery." I said, "He wants to hide everything." Dara said, "The hearing is tomorrow. We have to introduce the notary evidence before the judge grants the motion to seal. If he seals it, we can't use the press. We can't use public pressure. We will be fighting in the dark." I went back to the motel. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the parking lot. I felt exposed. The feeling of being watched was constant now. I went to my room. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The red light on the room phone was blinking. A voicemail. I hadn't given this number to anyone except Dara. I picked up the receiver and pressed play. "Watch the doors at the next hearing. The truth doesn't come from you." The voice was synthesized, robotic. It clicked off. I stood there, holding the receiver. "The truth doesn't come from you." What did that mean? Was I not enough? Or was there someone else? I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the door, waiting for it to burst open. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. Madeline's warning looped in my head. "You don't understand who you are pulling into this." Who were they? The men my father met with? The beneficiaries of the hush money? Were they dangerous? Or were they just desperate people, like the ones who lost their savings in Briarvale? Morning came with a heavy fog. I dressed in my darkest suit. I wanted to look like a shadow. I wanted to look like I belonged in the dark places I was digging into. I met Dara at the courthouse. She looked fierce. She had the notary's police report in her hand. "We go hard," she said. "We lead with the forgery. We don't let Norick speak first." We walked into the courtroom. It was usually empty. Just the bailiff and the clerk. But today, the benches were full. I stopped in the aisle. There were people sitting in the back rows, not the usual town gossips. These were men and women in suits, sitting perfectly still. They didn't look like they were from Briar Hollow. They looked like they were from the city. They looked corporate, watchful. I saw Madeline at the respondents' table. She turned around and saw the crowd. Her face went white, not pale, white. She grabbed Caleb Norrick's arm. She whispered something to him frantically. Norrick looked back at the crowd, and even his shark-like composure faltered. He adjusted his tie, a nervous tic I hadn't seen before. They didn't invite these people. I realized. I sat down next to Dara. "Who are they?" I whispered. "I don't know," Dara said, scanning the room, "but they are not here for moral support." Judge Holloway entered. He looked at the full courtroom and frowned. He banged his gavel. "This is the matter of the estate of Richard Kelly," he said. "We have several motions pending, a motion to seal from the respondent, and a motion to compel from the petitioner." He looked at Norrick. "Mr. Norrick, you are asking to seal these proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor," Norrick said, standing up. His voice was less booming today. He sounded rushed. "The discovery requests touch upon sensitive financial matters of third-party donors. It is imperative we protect their privacy." Dara stood up. "Your Honor, the only thing they are protecting is a forgery," she said clearly. "We have evidence that the affidavit submitted by the respondent was notarized with a stolen stamp. We have a witness prepared to testify that she never signed the document. This is not about privacy. It is about fraud." A murmur went through the courtroom. The strangers in the back didn't move. They just watched. Judge Holloway took off his glasses. "Fraud? That is a serious accusation. Ms. Linwood, we have the police report." "Your Honor," Dara said, holding it up, "and we have the missing Schedule B references. This entire estate filing is built on altered documents." The judge looked at Madeline. Madeline was staring at the table, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were yellow. "Mr. Norrick?" the judge asked. "Your Honor, this is surprise evidence," Norwick stammered. "We need time to review. Why has a simple inheritance dispute expanded into an inquiry on foundation governance and sealed agreements?" the judge asked, his voice rising. "Why am I hearing about shell companies and stolen stamps?" He paused. He looked out at the gallery, at the silent, watchful strangers. "And who are all these people?" Before anyone could answer, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom groaned. The sound was loud in the tense silence. Everyone turned. A man walked in. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a black suit that was cut with a precision that made Norwick's expensive tailoring look cheap. He carried a slim leather briefcase. He walked with a calm, terrifying confidence, ignoring the bailiff who started to rise. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight down the center aisle, past the wooden gate, and stopped before the judge's bench. He placed the briefcase on the table. Madeline let out a small, strangled sound. The judge banged his gavel. "Excuse me? You cannot just walk in here. Who are you?" The man turned. He looked at the room, his eyes scanning the faces until they landed on me for a brief second. Then he turned back to the judge. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a formal letter. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "My name is Adrian Sloan. I am counsel for the Harbor Shield Administration Trust." The room went dead silent. I watched Madeline. She had stopped breathing. "I am requesting leave to intervene." Adrian Sloan continued, "Because the assets this court is attempting to distribute are not assets at all. They are encumbered by agreements that predate this estate, and if you unseal them, you trigger the collapse of the Briar Vale settlement." He looked at Norrick, then at Dara. "I am here to ensure that does not happen." The doors behind him were still open, framing his silhouette against the light of the hallway. The truth had arrived, and it wasn't me. It was the man in the black suit, and he hadn't come to save us. He had come to take control. The courtroom air, previously stale and recycled, seemed to vanish, replaced by a vacuum of cold, sharp tension. Adrian Sloan stood at the center of it, a monolith in a black suit. He did not look like a lawyer who argued over property lines or traffic tickets. He looked like a man who negotiated treaties in windowless rooms. Harbor Shield Administration Trust, Judge Holloway repeated. Looking down at the business card Adrian had slid across the bench. I have never heard of this entity. And I have been sitting on this bench for 20 years. That is by design. Your Honor, Adrian said. His voice was smooth, lacking the jagged edges of nervous energy that filled the rest of the room. Harbor Shield is a private administrative trust established to manage long-term liability settlements. It does not advertise. Caleb Norick seemed to recover from his initial shock. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, trying to regain the alpha status he had held 5 minutes ago. Your Honor, I must object. Norick boomed. This is an ambush. This individual is not a party to this case. He has no standing to intervene in the probate of Richard Kelly, whatever this trust is. It is irrelevant to the distribution of assets between the sisters. It is entirely relevant. Adrian countered without turning his head. He spoke to the judge, ignoring Norick as one might ignore a barking dog. Because the assets you are attempting to distribute, specifically the liquid capital in the North Pine Foundation accounts and the lakeside property, are collateralized. Collateralized? The judge asked. Encumbered, Adrian corrected gently. They are the funding mechanism for a series of confidential settlement agreements dating back 5 years. These agreements are tied to the insolvency of the Briar Vale Credit Union. The judge stiffened. The name Briar Vale still carried weight in this town. It was a ghost story that everyone knew but no one told. Mr. Sloan, the judge said slowly, are you suggesting that the decedent, Richard Kelly, used his estate to guarantee debts related to a failed bank? Not debts, Your Honor. Adrian said. He opened his slim briefcase. The click of the latches was audible in the back row. He pulled out a binder, thick and bound in black plastic, protective relocation support. Adrian said. The courtroom murmured. I saw the strangers in the back row shift slightly. Leaning forward. What does that mean? The judge asked. It means, Adrian continued, that Richard Kelly was a signatory to a risk containment strategy. Following the collapse of the credit union, several individuals possessed information that, if made public in a chaotic manner, would have caused significant reputational and financial damage to community stakeholders. To prevent this, a structure was created to relocate these individuals and ensure their financial stability in exchange for their non-participation in any litigation. He let the words hang there. Non-participation. It was a polite way of saying silence. Witness protection. Dara whispered next to me. Private witness protection. Adrian handed the binder to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge like it was a loaded weapon. These are the contracts. Adrian said, they are active, they require monthly maintenance, and they contain a trigger clause. A trigger clause? The judge asked. Opening the binder. Yes, Adrian said. If the existence of the trust is exposed in a public forum, specifically, if testimony regarding the underlying insolvency is threatened, the administration of the trust shifts. The assets used to fund it must be frozen to prevent liquidation. He turned slightly, his eyes finally landing on me. They were gray, flat, and utterly unreadable. Ms. Kelly's recent filings, and her pursuit of the Foundation's internal records, have triggered this clause. She has, inadvertently, threatened the anonymity of the beneficiaries. I am here to secure the assets before the breach becomes total. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had done this. My digging, my questions. I had tripped a wire I didn't even know existed. Norwick slammed his hand on the table. This is preposterous, he shouted. Your Honor, this is a fabrication designed to freeze my client's inheritance. There is no proof that Richard Kelly signed these documents. Adrian didn't shout. He simply pointed to tab 3 in the binder. You will find the signature of Richard Kelly on page 12, notarized and authenticated. You will also find the signature of the co-signer and operational manager of the funds. He paused. Madeline Kelly. The silence that followed was absolute. I turned to look at my sister. She wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at her hands, which were clasped so tightly in her lap that they looked like white marble. Norwick looked down at Madeline. He hadn't known. I could see it in his face. She had lied to her own lawyer. "Madeline?" Norwick asked, his voice dropping. She didn't answer. "Your Honor," Adrian said, "Madeline Kelly is not merely the beneficiary of this estate. For the last 3 years, she has been the acting gatekeeper. She established Grey Pine Asset Services as a vehicle to route the payments from the foundation to the trust, ensuring the beneficiaries received their support without a direct link to the Kelly name. She has not been stealing the money, as the petitioner suggests. She has been fulfilling a contractual obligation to keep the system running." I stared at Madeline, the shell company, the office next to the legal division, the payment of the lake house bills. She hadn't been buying herself a vacation home. She had been maintaining the safe house. She wasn't a thief. She was a warden. Dara stood up. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension in it. "Your Honor, may I be heard?" The judge looked up from the binder. He looked sick. "Go ahead. Ms. Linwood, Mr. Sloan describes these agreements as protective relocation support," Dara said, walking toward the center of the room. She stood a few feet from Adrian, but let us call them what they are. "Hush money." She turned to Adrian. "Mr. Sloan, you admit that the purpose of this trust was to prevent testimony? To prevent uncontrolled testimony." Adrian corrected. "To prevent chaos. To prevent the truth about a bank failure from coming out." Dara pressed. "And to do that, you and the late Mr. Kelly paid potential witnesses to leave town and stay quiet. We provided them with a fresh start." Adrian said, "It was a humanitarian solution to a complex problem." "Humanitarian?" Dara asked sharply. "Or obstruction of justice?" "Objection!" Norwick yelled. "Overruled!" The judge snapped. He was reading the documents furiously. "Mr. Sloan?" Dara continued. "Who benefits from this silence? Who are the stakeholders you mentioned? Because it sounds like my client's father spent his fortune protecting someone else. Who was he afraid of?" Adrian's expression didn't change. "The trust protects the community. Ms. Linwood, it prevents a chain of lawsuits that would bankrupt local businesses and destroy the credit rating of the township. It is a firewall." "And my client?" Dara said, pointing at me. "She is just collateral damage? Her inheritance is being used to pay for this firewall?" "Her inheritance is the fuel for the firewall," Adrian said. "Without it, the agreements fail. The beneficiaries stop receiving support. They return, they speak, and the stability of this town evaporates." He looked at the judge. "That is why I am here, Your Honor, to request that the court sequester the estate assets into the trust immediately. The inheritance dispute is secondary to the contractual obligations of the deceased." Judge Holloway closed the binder. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked like a man who had just realized his house was built on a sinkhole. "This is extraordinary," the judge said. "We are talking about millions of dollars flowing into a shadow organization." He looked at the gallery, at the silent observers in the back. "I cannot rule on this in open court," the judge said. "The nature of these agreements, if what Mr. Sloan says is true, involves sensitive personal data of third parties." He banged the gavel. "I am ordering an emergency in-camera review of these documents. I want all counsel in my chambers in 10 minutes. The courtroom is cleared. Everyone out." The bailiff moved to the gallery. "Please clear the room." The strangers in the back stood up in unison. They didn't speak. They filed out, their eyes lingering on Adrian Sloan as they passed. Norwick grabbed his briefcase. "Madeline, stay here," he hissed. "Don't say a word to anyone." He marched toward the judge's chambers, followed by Dara and Adrian. I was left alone at my table. Madeline was alone at hers. The bailiff looked at us. "You two can wait in the hallway," he said. We walked out into the corridor. The marble floor echoed with our footsteps. The strangers had vanished, likely to the parking lot to make phone calls. It was just me and Madeline, standing under the portrait of a long-dead judge. I leaned against the wall, my legs feeling like rubber. Madeline stood by the window, staring out at the rain. "You knew," I said. My voice sounded jagged. She didn't turn around. Of course I knew. Alice, I signed the checks. Why? I asked. Why would you do it? Why would you help him hide this? She turned then. Her face was stripped of all its armor. She looked younger, scared. Because he begged me. She said, her voice broke. I stared at her. He came to me 3 years ago, Madeline said. After he tried to resign and they wouldn't let him, he was terrifyingly lucid. Alice, he sat me down in the study and told me everything. He told me about the advisory committee. He told me about the pressure they put on him to fix the mess. He said he had built a machine he couldn't turn off. The lock. I whispered. Yes, she said. He told me that if anything happened to him, I had to keep it running. He made me promise. He said if the money stopped, the people on the list, the witnesses, they would come back. Or worse, the people who wanted them silent would deal with them. She wrapped her arms around herself. I wasn't trying to steal your inheritance, Alice. I was trying to keep you away from it. I knew if you got involved, if you saw the books, you would ask questions. You always ask questions. And I knew if you asked questions, Adrian Sloane would show up. She gestured to the courtroom doors. And now he is here, and you have no idea what you have started. I pushed off the wall. So Dad's letter, what I let happen. He wasn't talking about us, Madeline said, tears spilling over. He was talking about the families he paid to disappear. He felt guilty every single day, but he was trapped. He thought he was buying peace. And you? I asked. You became the accomplice? I became the daughter who stayed, she snapped, her eyes flashing. You left, Alice. You went to the city. You got to be free. You got to have your art and your coffee shops and your clean conscience. I stayed here. I took care of him, and when he handed me a ticking bomb and asked me to hold it, I held it, because that is what you do for family. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the lines of stress around her mouth that makeup couldn't hide. I saw the fear that had been driving her every move. She wasn't a villain. She was a victim who had been convinced she was a soldier. But that didn't make it right. Madeline, I said softly, we are paying people to hide a crime. That is not family. That is the mafia. It is legacy, she cried. It is the only reason the foundation still exists. If this comes out, North Pine is finished. The reputation of the Kelly name is dust. I don't care about the name, I shouted back. I care about the truth. Madeline laughed, a harsh, sobbing sound. The truth? You think the truth is some noble thing? The truth is messy. Alice, the truth ruins people, innocent people. The people on that list? They are safe because of us. If the trust dissolves, they are exposed. You aren't saving anyone. You are putting targets on their backs. I froze. Is that true? I asked. She wiped her eyes. Why do you think Adrian is here? He isn't protecting Dad's ghost. He is protecting the asset. The asset is silence. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I had thought I was fighting for justice, but Madeline was right. I had pulled a thread. And now the whole tapestry was unraveling, and underneath, there were people hiding in the dark. The door to the judge's chambers opened. Dara stepped out. She looked pale. She waved at me. Come back in, she said. Madeline and I walked back into the courtroom. It felt different now. Smaller. The air was heavy with the weight of the secrets that had just been spilled in the judge's office. Judge Holloway was sitting on the bench. He looked like he had aged 5 years in 20 minutes. He didn't look at the binder. He looked at us, Ms. Kelly, Ms. Linwood, Mr. Norwick, Mr. Sloane, please take your seats. We sat. The judge folded his hands. I have reviewed the documents provided by the Harbor Shield Administration Trust. He began. His voice was low and grave. They appear to be authentic. They establish a prima facie case that the assets of the Richard Kelly estate are commingled with a liability structure that predates the will. He paused, looking at Madeline. However, the existence of these agreements raises significant legal questions that go beyond the scope of a simple probate hearing. We are looking at potential breach of fiduciary duty. We are looking at the possible misappropriation of charitable funds from the North Pine Foundation, and we are looking at the validity of sealing testimony in a matter of public interest. He turned to Adrian. Mr. Sloan, your motion to intervene is granted. The trust is now a party to this case. Adrian nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. But, the judge continued, his voice hardening, I am not granting your request to immediately sequester the assets. I will not allow this court to be used as a rubber stamp for a cover-up. Madeline gasped. I am ordering a full forensic accounting of the North Pine Foundation and the Harbor Shield Trust. The judge said, I want to know exactly where every dollar came from and where it went. I want to know who the beneficiaries are. Not their names, perhaps, but their relationship to the Briar Vale insolvency. Your Honor, Norick stammered. The reputational damage is already done. Mr. Norick, the judge snapped, your client, Miss Madeline Kelly, has admitted in chambers to managing these funds through a shell company. That admission alone is grounds for expanding this inquiry. He looked at me. Ms. Alice Kelly, you came here asking for your share of an inheritance. It appears that inheritance may be the proceeds of, or the funding for, illicit activities. You may find that at the end of this, there is no money left. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my voice was clear. I understand. Your Honor. The judge nodded. This case is no longer about who gets the lake house. It is about whether the Kelly family legacy is a criminal enterprise. He picked up his gavel. I am scheduling a final hearing for 2 weeks from today. Mandatory disclosures from all parties. No redactions. No privilege logs. If you hide a single piece of paper, I will hold you in contempt, and I will refer this matter to the district attorney. He slammed the gavel down. We are adjourned. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Adrian Sloan closed his briefcase. He didn't look upset. He looked like a man who had calculated this outcome and had a contingency plan. He walked over to Madeline's table. Ms. Kelly, he said calmly, we have work to do. Madeline looked at him with a mix of dependency and revulsion. She stood up, her movement stiff. She didn't look at me. She turned and followed Adrian out of the courtroom, a prisoner of the system she had tried to protect. Dara packed her bag slowly. Well, she said, we got the truth? I looked at the empty judge's bench. Did we? I asked. Or did we just open Pandora's box? Dara looked at me. We opened it. Alice, now we have to deal with what comes out. I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was empty, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that the text message was right. The truth didn't come from me. It came from the past, and it was ugly. I walked to the window and looked out at the town square. Briar Hollow looked the same as it always had. Quaint, quiet, peaceful. But now I saw the cracks. I saw the shadow of the harbor shield over everything. I wasn't just fighting for my father's love anymore. I was fighting to see if there was anything decent left in his name at all. 2 weeks. We had 2 weeks to find out if the Kelly family was a tragedy or a crime. I took a deep breath. I'm ready. I whispered to the glass. But deep down, I wasn't sure if anyone could be ready for what was coming. The boxes arrived on a Thursday morning, 3 days before the final hearing. They were not delivered by a courier, but by a pair of paralegals from Adrian Sloan's firm, who placed them on Dara's conference table with a solemnity usually reserved for religious artifacts. We finally have it, Dara said, cutting the tape on the first box. The unsealed records. I stood by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. I felt a strange reluctance to look inside. For weeks, I had been clawing at the door, desperate to see what was behind it. Now that the door was open, I was afraid of the monsters I might find. Come look, Alice, Dara said. I walked over. Dara had spread a series of spreadsheets across the table. They were financial ledgers from the North Pine Foundation, dating back 5 years. But unlike the previous versions, there were no black bars. Here is the flow, Dara said, tracing a line with her finger. Money leaves the Foundation's primary endowment. It is labeled as a community stabilization grant. It goes into a sub-account. From there, It is transferred to Harbor Shield. And then? I asked. Then it gets specific. Dara said. She flipped to a page of bank transfers. Harbor Shield pays out monthly stipends. Look at the labels. Housing assistance, educational support, relocation fee. I looked at the names of the recipients. I didn't recognize them. Sarah Miller, David Ortiz, Linda Vance. Who are they? I asked. Dara pulled up a second document. A personnel list from the defunct Briarvale Credit Union. Sarah Miller was the head teller. Dara said, David Ortiz was a loan officer. Linda Vance was the assistant to the branch manager, the man who committed suicide. I stared at the names. They weren't powerful people. They were employees. Working-class people who had likely seen the fraud happening, who had been terrified of losing their jobs or being implicated. They were paid to leave. I said, they were paid to disappear. Dara corrected, and to keep their mouths shut. Your father's money, the money Madeline was managing, was their lifeline. If they talked, the money stopped. If they stayed hidden, they got a check every month. I felt a wave of nausea. It was a payroll of silence. Alice, Dara said, her voice serious. We have enough here to blow the roof off the courthouse. We can prove commingling. We can prove that the estate assets are inextricably linked to this hush money scheme. We can force a liquidation. I looked at the list of names again. Sarah Miller, she probably had kids. If we blew this up, if we exposed the trust, the money would stop. What would happen to her? We can't just destroy them. Dara, I said. Dara looked at me over her glasses. Alice, they are part of a cover-up. They are victims, I said, or at least, they started that way. My father and the others, they leveraged these people. They used fear to buy them. If we expose the list, we ruin their lives. They will be dragged into depositions. They might be prosecuted. So what do you want to do? Dara asked. We have to present this to the judge. We present the structure, I said. We present the financial flow, but we don't name the names. We ask the judge to seal the recipient list. I want accountability for the people who built the machine, not the people caught in the gears. Dara nodded slowly. Truth without cruelty. It is a hard line to walk in probate court. It is the only line I'm willing to walk, I said. That evening, I returned to the motel. The neon sign was buzzing louder than usual, or maybe my nerves were just frayed. I was fumbling with my keycard when a car pulled into the spot next to mine. It was Madeline's Mercedes. I stopped. I didn't run. I didn't call Dara. I just stood there and waited. Madeline got out. She looked immaculate, as always, but there was a fragility to her movements. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist, and her hair was pulled back so severely it looked painful. Can we talk? She asked. No lawyers, just us. I opened the door to my room. Come in. The room smelled of stale coffee and industrial lemon cleaner. Madeline stood in the center of the cramped space, looking out of place, like a diamond in a coal bin. She didn't sit down. I saw the disclosures Adrian sent over. She said. Her voice was flat. Then you know it is over. I said, we can trace the money. Madeline, we know about the tellers. Madeline closed her eyes for a brief second. You are going to ruin them. Alice, those people. They rely on those checks. If the judge freezes the accounts, they lose everything. I am not the one who put them in this position. I said, you and Dad did that. You made them dependent on a lie. I am trying to protect them, she snapped, her eyes flying open. Are you? I asked. Or are you protecting yourself? Because as long as they are quiet, no one asks why Madeline Kelly was running a shell company. Madeline took a deep breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I have a proposal, she said. She placed the folder on the cheap laminate desk. We go to the judge together, she said. We petition for a joint settlement. We agree to split the estate 50-50. You get half the cash, half the property value. In exchange, we ask the court to permanently seal the details of the Harbor Shield Trust to protect the privacy of the beneficiaries. I looked at the folder. Half the estate, It was millions of dollars. Enough to buy a house, a studio, a life where I never had to worry about rent again. "We seal the records?" I asked. "Yes," Madeline said. "We frame it as a humanitarian necessity. We say that exposing the beneficiaries would cause undue harm. The judge will accept it if we are united. We keep the machine running. Alice, but you get paid. You get to walk away." I looked at her face. She was desperate. She was offering me a fortune to help her put the lid back on the jar. "And what happens to the truth?" I asked. "What happens to the fact that Dad covered up a financial collapse?" "It stays buried," Madeline said, "where it belongs. Dad's legacy remains intact. The foundation continues its good work, and you and I, we can finally be sisters again. We can put this behind us." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Sisters, that was the real bribe, not the money. She was offering me a way back into the family. I almost said yes. It would be so easy. I could take the money and leave this gray, rainy town. I could be the rich, eccentric aunt. But then I thought about the letter. Hold steady when they pressure you. And I thought about the twist that Dara and I had discovered only hours ago. I picked up the folder and handed it back to her. "I can't do it." "Madeline, why?" she cried. "Why do you have to be so stubborn? It is a win-win." "Because of Schedule B." I said. Madeline froze. "We found it." I said, or rather, Dara found the digital ghost of it in the files Adrian produced. It wasn't missing because Dad wanted to cut me out. It wasn't missing because he forgot. I took a step closer to her. He removed it because he was ashamed. I said, "But the text survived. Do you know what was on that schedule?" "Madeline?" She stared at me, her lip trembling. It listed conditional distributions. I said, "It said that if the Harbor Shield Trust was ever dissolved or exposed, the remaining assets of the estate were not to go to you." Madeline went pale. "They were to go to a scholarship fund for the children of the credit union victims." I said, "And to an anonymous beneficiary." I paused. "Do you know who the anonymous beneficiary is?" Madeline shook her head, a microscopic movement. "It is the widow of the branch manager." I said, "The man who killed himself. Dad didn't just want to hide the truth. He wanted to make reparations. If the secret came out, he wanted the money to go to the people he hurt." I looked at my sister, whose world was crumbling. He prepared for this. Madeline, he knew the lock would break eventually. He just didn't have the courage to break it himself. Madeline dropped the folder. It hit the floor with a dull thud. "He never told me," she whispered. "He just told me to keep rowing. He was weak," I said gently, "and he made you carry his weakness. But I won't help you carry it anymore. We are not sealing the record. We are going to court." Madeline looked at me with a mixture of hatred and respect. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. "Then you are on your own, Alice, and when the judge destroys the foundation, it will be on your head." She turned and walked out. I watched her drive away, her taillights blurring in the rain. I was alone again, but for the first time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt clean. The morning of the final hearing. The sun actually came out. It was a pale, watery light, but it made the wet pavement shine. I wore my best suit, a dark navy that Dara said made me look serious. The courtroom was packed. The strangers in suits were back, sitting in the rear rows like a murder of crows. The local press was there, pens poised. The air buzzed with the static electricity of a scandal about to break. Judge Holloway took the bench. He looked rested, his face set in a mask of grim determination. "We are here for the final disposition of the estate of Richard Kelly," he announced, "and the related inquiry into the North Pine Foundation and the Harbor Shield Administration Trust." He looked at our table. "Ms. Linwood, you may proceed." Dara stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She simply laid the bricks of truth. One by one. "Your Honor," she began. "Over the last month, we have uncovered a complex web of deception designed to obscure the true nature of the decedent's assets. We have presented evidence of a notarized affidavit that was forged using a stolen stamp. We have presented proof that the executrix, Madeline Kelly, operated a shell company, Gray Pine Asset Services, which shared office space and resources with the North Pine Foundation. Dara held up a stack of documents. And finally, we have the unsealed financial records. These records show a deliberate and systematic routing of estate funds into the Harbor Shield Trust. This trust was not a charitable endeavor. It was a mechanism to purchase the silence of witnesses to the Briar Vale Credit Union insolvency. The courtroom was silent. No one moved. Dara turned to look at Adrian Sloane. "We are not asking the court to punish the beneficiaries of this trust," she said. "They were pawns. But we are asking the court to acknowledge that the estate of Richard Kelly is fruit of a poisoned tree. The money was being used to obstruct justice." She sat down. The judge turned to Adrian. "Mr. Sloane," the judge said, "do you deny these characterizations?" Adrian stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "Your Honor, the Harbor Shield Trust was established to mitigate risk. The payments were contractual settlements. They were legal. But were they ethical?" the judge asked. "And were they disclosed to the beneficiaries of the estate?" "They were disclosed to the acting manager, Madeline Kelly," Adrian said. The judge looked at Madeline. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of tragedy. "And the purpose was to seal testimony?" the judge pressed. "The purpose was to ensure stability." Adrian said, "That is a yes," the judge said. He looked down at his notes. "I have reviewed the findings. I have seen the flow of funds. And I have seen the missing Schedule B, which was recovered from the digital archives of the decedent's personal computer." The judge picked up a piece of paper. "This court finds that the estate of Richard Kelly cannot be awarded cleanly. The assets have been commingled with agreements that violate the public policy of this state. You cannot use a probate court to enforce a hush money scheme." He leaned forward. "I am referring the North Pine Foundation to the Attorney General for a full investigation into its governance and its tax-exempt status. I am referring the operations of the Harbor Shield Trust to the District Attorney to determine if witness tampering occurred." Madeline flinched as if she had been slapped. "And regarding the estate," the judge continued, "I am issuing an interim order." He looked at me. "Alice Kelly, you have petitioned for your share, but because the extent of the liability is unknown, I cannot distribute the full residue. However, I am ordering an immediate distribution of $250,000 to you to ensure your stability during this process." He turned to Madeline. "The remainder of the liquid assets and the control of the North Pine Foundation are frozen. The lakeside property at Blackwood Point is placed under the management of a court-appointed neutral trustee. Ms. Kelly, you are removed as executrix effective immediately." Madeline stood up slowly. She looked small in the large room. "Your Honor," she said. Her voice was shaking, but audible. "Ms. Kelly?" the judge asked. "I did not do it for the money," she said. She turned to look at the gallery, at the town she had ruled for so long. "I believed that if the machine stopped, everything our father built would be destroyed. I believed I was the only one strong enough to hold the wall up. I was terrified that if I let go, I would be the one blamed for the collapse." She looked at me. "I just wanted to save the family. Alice. That is all. It was the truth. It was a twisted, broken truth, but it was hers." The judge looked at her with a mixture of pity and severity. "You may have wanted to save the family, Ms. Kelly, but you sacrificed the truth to do it, and a family built on lies is not worth saving." He turned to me. "Ms. Alice Kelly, do you have anything to say before I enter this order?" I stood up. I felt the eyes of the entire room on me, the strangers, the reporter, my sister, the man in the black suit. I looked at the judge. "I don't want the foundation," I said. "I don't want the power. I just want my father's name attached to something honest for once. If that means the money goes to the victims, then let it go. If that means the lake house is sold, let it be sold. I just want to walk out of here knowing that the secrets are gone." I sat down. The room was absolutely quiet. Even Adrian Sloane looked at me with something resembling respect. Madeline looked stunned, as if I had spoken in a language she had forgotten. The plainness of it hung in the air. Something honest. The judge nodded. So ordered, he said. He banged the gavel. The aftermath was a blur of paperwork and flashing cameras. I didn't give interviews. I slipped out the side door with Dara. We stood in the parking lot, the wind whipping our hair. You did it, Dara said. You took down the fortress. I looked at the courthouse. Madeline was still inside, surrounded by lawyers. Adrian Sloan was already in his black sedan, making calls, likely doing damage control for the next crisis. I don't feel like a winner, I said. You aren't a winner. Alice, Dara said. You are a survivor, and you are free. That is better than winning. I drove to the lake house one last time. The court-appointed trustee hadn't changed the locks yet. I didn't go inside. I just walked down to the water's edge. The lake was gray and choppy. I thought about my father. I thought about the fear that had eaten him alive. I thought about the letter, what I let happen. He had been a good man who did a bad thing, and then spent the rest of his life trying to pay for it with money instead of courage. I took the letter out of my pocket. I had carried it with me every day since I found it. I tore it in half, then in quarters, then into tiny pieces. I threw the confetti into the wind. The white scraps danced over the dark water before vanishing into the waves. I got back into my car. I had a check for $250,000 in my bag. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. I would go back to the city. I would get a new apartment. I would paint again. But first, I took out my phone. I deleted the text thread with the anonymous number. I deleted the photos of the documents. I started the engine. As I drove out of Briar Hollow, I passed the sign, "Welcome to Briar Hollow, a community of tradition." I smiled. Tradition was just peer pressure from dead people. I was done with tradition. I turned onto the highway and didn't look back. The rearview mirror showed only the empty road. Stretching out behind me, clear and open. Thank you for listening to My Wealthy Sister Demanded My Inheritance in Court. Then a man in a black suit walked in and... This story explored the heavy cost of family secrets and the courage it takes to break the cycle of silence. Alice's journey wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming her own narrative from a legacy of fear. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. Do you think Alice made the right choice by exposing the trust? Or should she have taken Madeline's deal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, drama, and the complex road to redemption. Thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next story.